Well, Prime Minister Tony Abbott meets President Obama very shortly, and while the two may not agree on the importance of climate change in world affairs, a new heavy-hitting group of multinationals, together worth about $1 trillion, is today calling on Australia to act now on climate change. The Corporate Leaders Group initiative has been meeting in London this week. Helping them is Australian corporate advisor firm Pottinger, now a member of the group's International Council. And back to London again, because Pottinger CEO and co-founder Nigel Lake joins me. Nigel, welcome.
Good evening.
Now, what exactly, Nigel, brought this group of very big companies together?
Look, this goes back quite some way, and the group was originally brought together about a decade ago to address the fact that I think it's a pretty lonely time for governments when it comes to dealing with issues like climate change, which relate to very long-run effects where you're being asked to do things in the short term. And this group came together really to send a message that they wanted to put behind them the debate and discussion over the science and move forward to focus on, where are the best economic opportunities to take action on climate change and to do things which will ultimately contribute to economic growth and prosperity over time.
Now, these corporates reckon that we can all get to, and I'm quoting here, zero emissions in ways that create new business opportunities with manageable costs. How?
Look, I think every company has its own story, and I was talking to one of the chief executives yesterday. It's a water business, and they had been through an exercise engaging with their entire supply chain about how they could take carbon content out of their activities. And they ended up, they're partway through an initiative now. They've taken something like 41% of the carbon content out. They've also cut the cost of all those inputs by 25%. It's just an isolated example. But there are many different places in industries where if you're prepared simply to sit back, think differently and say, surely there's a better way to do this, that you can actually have a very beneficial impact.
On some of these decisions, though, I suppose the challenge is that investment decisions are risky. You only have to look at Barack Obama, the American government, having to eat, what, $500 million with Solyndra in California. And I think even the whole biofuel concept in Europe, creating biojet, is now, slightly questionable. How are we going to get around these major investment risks?
The key to this really is to be thinking very long term about where you're going to end up. I think Australia is a great example of this, where we have the benefit of a very high amount of sunshine or solar radiation per head of population. And if you look at the cost of solar energy in the form of solar PV, once upon a time it was incredibly expensive. There's something like 40 years worth of history as to how expensive that energy is, and we're now at the point where it is either the same or potentially cheaper than energy from the grid. So you can look at very long-term trends and get to the point where you can say, look, we don't know exactly when we should do this, but we certainly know that within 5 or 10 years the world is going to be very different, and you then take decisions which line up with the future rather than trying to preserve the past for too long.
What about the carbon markets? Because we seem to be going in a rather strange direction in various places around the world, and partly it's because carbon is now so cheap. We've got, what, a $3 a tonne in Europe for carbon dioxide at the moment. You've got places like Germany who are mining lignite, really dirty coal, exports of coal going to Britain, who's closing down gas power stations. It would seem to me that markets aren't the answer. You need to have some sort of regulation.
Well, that's an excellent question. I think that set of issues is at the heart of what the Corporate Leaders Group has been trying to focus on, and also more broadly the Cambridge University Institute for Sustainability Leadership, which is you have to step back from all of the short-term things which are happening and all the short-term price signals, some of which may be completely misaligned with what you might want to achieve over the long term, and ask questions about the structures which we're operating within, the regulations that there may be. And these are clearly tough questions for governments to answer. Hence, I think that these 22 companies felt very strongly that as corporates they should stand up and show some leadership and encourage to try to make it easier for governments to deal with these very difficult decisions.
Yeah, I don't see any of the top 20 on the ASX in that group. Is there a reason for that?
That would be a question you might best ask them. It's interesting to note that a fair number of those companies have signed some of the communiques put out by the Corporate Leaders Group over the years. And there's certainly organisations like Westpac and NAB have both been signatories and have been doing quite a lot internally in relation to climate change. Some of the big property companies likewise. I think it has been, people feel it's difficult to take a very public stance because the debate has become so very political in Australia, more so than many other countries. But hopefully more companies will come forward, because I think that just makes it easier from a political point of view, not more difficult.
Briefly, do you see the Barack Obama speech as a watershed? Because, of course, they are still exporting coal as fast as they can.
Well, they are, and it's similar to what's going on in China. A lot of people talk about how much coal-fired power is being produced in China. They, as a nation, have invested hugely heavily in wind and solar PV production. I think the watershed moment, for me, is driven more by the economics. You can set aside the political discussions. You can even set aside the debate on the science if you still want to have it, and simply look at the price curves on some forms of renewable energy. And if you compare that to investing in coal, and you may build a coal-fired power station today, but you've got to be confident it's going to be economically competitive for 25 to 30 years. Otherwise, you'll have bet your shirt on something which turned out to be a very bad investment.
All right, Nigel Lake, thank you very much for joining us there.
A pleasure, Ticky. Thank you.